It's time to say it. It is unconstitutional, a violation of the 5th and 14th Amendment of literally anyone who serves this country, both in civilian and military positions, who are required under law to serve this country with honor and distinction. We determine that honor and distinction by things called criminal background checks and national security checks, as well as those of whom hold high enough areas of service where they are entrusted with national security information, that those people are required to handle that national security information in very specific ways. And if they fail to handle those things, it is determined that they potentially improperly manage those national security documents, that those individuals, their terms can be suspended until the completion of the investigation, and if it is determined that what they did was a crime, they go to jail. That is not the case with elected officials. And that is wrong, it is immoral, and it is a violation of the 5th and 14th Amendment of literally everyone who serves. It is a 5th and 14th Amendment violation of anyone who has to go through criminal background checks for any type of government assistance, benefit, or even to enter this country. It is a violation of their 5th and 14th Amendment that those of whom are in charge of these things, ultimately at the level of Washington, D.C., are permitted to not have those qualifications, to not have criminal background checks, national security checks, and obligations to treat national security information as though they were high-ranking officers in the military. Thank you. That was my video that I really started committing myself to actually doing exactly this, restoring honor in D.C., and to make that the primary focus of my activism and my efforts going forward. It began with an inspiration by Jessica Denson and Lights On, which I hope you guys will subscribe to her channel. This is what kind of began me even creating a whole new channel and being really committed to growing it and growing a movement. Al Green is putting forward, thank God, an impeachment in Congress. And there are Jessica Denson's 14th Now movement. There are the Citizens Impeachment movement, the Impeach Trump Again. These efforts are vital and important. And they're not just important, or the only way they will really be truly significant is if there is a vision in this effort to do an impeachment, not just of Trump, but just impeaching someone. You could just get rid of Trump, pull that out of your head, just impeaching anyone. Because you know what we always do whenever we impeach someone? We don't change the fundamental structure. We don't change what makes the swamp that exists in our society. The swamp that Trump runs on, who he himself is a swamp monster. He is a person who made his money off of the swamp. And just like what I talked about before in dealing with the history issues, the lessons of history, is that the swamp exists to make the people who benefit from the swamp more money, or to make them feel morally or ethically virtuous. And Congressman Al Green, as a black man, is actually kind of aware, because of African American history, is an expression of what the swamp has been for hundreds and hundreds of years. But the truth is, the history of what is the swamp goes back into ancient times. If we're willing to just basically say that what the swamp is an unethical society that people financially and ethically benefit from, that causes grave injustices within that society. We know what these are. We're seeing them right now. That's why there's a citizen movement. That's why there was an impeachment movement. That's why people wanted to impeach Clinton. That's why people wanted to impeach Nixon. That's why people wanted to impeach all kinds of people, because they see the injustice. That's why Trump is seen as an honest man, because he is being honest about the swamp. He was the friend of Epstein, who was the quintessential swamp monster, who understood the swamp so well of D.C. that he could literally bring them teenage girls to have sex with. That's the swamp. We can make it unconstitutional. One of the core areas of making it unconstitutional is exactly where we are now, and is the fundamental legal challenge that exists, that faces our country. And that if these one simple thing were to happen, it would render much of the swamp unconstitutional. It would be a beginning process. And I'm not just talking about what I talk about in the initial video about, basically saying that elected officials should get background checks and national security checks as a violation of equal protection under the law. But you see, Attorney General Gonzalez was the 2006 Attorney General. In there was a memo called Collateral Consequences upon Conviction. The 2006 memo was arguing in response to a number of discussions that were occurring at the time and that have been occurring in this country for a very long time. And that is it constitutional at the D.C. level for a convicted felon to hold public office? Because there were lots of legal theories and legal theorists who were saying, no, all you have to do is, be born here, be born in whatever jurisdiction, run for that office, and yeah, you could be a convicted felon and hold public office, which is absolutely, totally insane. But then they wrote their memo, and they wrote that first sentence, which you'll read if you read the memo, Collateral Consequences Upon Conviction, where they say that the Constitution is not clear on that. And that is true. But you have to, don't be lazy, read the next paragraphs. Because the next paragraphs go into the fundamental question, the exact question we are in and have been in since November, not prior to November. You see, prior to November, can a convicted felon run for an office? The answer is yes. I would actually kind of agree that they could. Could they hold the office? No, that's different. Because actually in our history, convicted felons have run for office. They should be able to run for office, they're just never going to gain that office. You see, your state, your city, your county has various levels of where that is fundamentally illegal, where a convicted felon cannot hold a public office. You can run for public office, but if you win, even if you win, you don't get that seat because you're a convicted felon and you haven't done the things. Of course, this changes kind of from state to state and city to city. We just haven't challenged that legal theory, which is the creation of the damn swamp of D.C., because D.C. has, think in your mind, what is the most corrupt city in this country? That city has a higher morality requirement to be mayor than the President of the United States, because they make it illegal for convicted felons to hold public office. You can run because sometimes when you run as a convicted felon, it's your First Amendment right. You are petitioning the government, which is one of the reasons why I'm thinking of actually running for office, to actually do what I believe a person who does not wish to win but simply make a statement, what they could do. Why a convicted felon could run for office just to make the statement, just to be next to their congressman, their senator, the president of the freaking United States, and say, like in New York, the rent is too damn high. To just be able to say that. How does the 2006 DOJ memo, right? How does it make that clear? How does the 2006 DOJ memo say that it is unconstitutional, or at least highly questionable, because it's never been tested? We've never been tested at this point. Basically, it deals with this other part of the, of Article 2, Section 4, the impeachment clause, which says upon convictions of high crimes and misdemeanors, bribery, all this stuff, right? All of that, the conviction. the issue that they were bringing up, because they listed inside of that memo a variety of criminal acts that you can do, that inside of those laws says that if you are guilty of these things, you cannot hold public office. Even at DC, it lists a number of crimes. There are financial crimes, some other things, rioting against, trying to take up arms against the government, that sort of thing, right? Little things like that, or varying even degrees of taking up arms, like way overly protesting or whatever, protests that go way out of hand, things like that. It's just, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. It's kind of interesting. And the reason why a lot of that stuff is there is because when you read those laws, you can hear the 14th Amendment in them, the 14th Amendment Section 3 in them. You can hear and see written into them is exactly the Article 2, Section 4, the Impeachment Clause, no bribery. In other words, don't do financial crimes. So we do that. We have that there. The problem is we lazily think that what our founding fathers wanted was the only place where the conviction would take place is in the Senate. No. What happens if you're convicted in a court of law and you lose all of your appeals, which have determined that your conviction was not political, which I totally agree with people, that when you put handcuffs on a person who's running for office, or you put handcuffs on a person who is in office, you had better be clear. It had better pass all kinds of reviews to make certain that it was not political. And if it's determined not to be political and convicted, they still get their appeals. And if they lose them all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, then they are not allowed to hold that office. And if they're in office, there should be a special election. Oh, and by the way, the Constitution, I think it's the 14th Amendment, Section 5, Section 4, I think, sorry, that outlines how a special election for the President of the United States should be, and how you do that. So we don't do this. We need to challenge that. Because the reason why it should be that if you are convicted of a felony, but in a court of law, it's determined that there was no political motive, and you lost all appeals up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The reason why that should equal conviction in the Senate is very specific, because of what created the 14th Amendment Section 3, and why the 14th Amendment Section 3 requires 2/3 to bring you back into government. And the reason why that is because they originally had this hope, this aspiration, and it kind of makes a lot of sense, right? So if 2/3 of the House and the Senate bring people into government, then they have already voted in the required number to throw you out of office. It literally creates a vote that takes place as the government is formed, that is the number required to convict a person in the Senate for immorality or, crime or whatever. That vote has already taken place. Our desire to have country over party was actually written into the 14th Amendment, Section 3. And then, of course, you want to know what changed all of that? The Great Compromise, I think it was 1877. Or at least that's what we white people call it, Congressman Green. African-American history calls it the Great Betrayal because, yeah, it kind of sort of was a betrayal, because it was just about after that time that the first black congressman coming from South Carolina and the first black senator out of Mississippi came here. We're there because they were just because that's how many slaves were freed. When they were freed, they decided to go vote. And when they voted, there was so many more black slaves who could vote, that they outnumbered their slave owners, because that's how many slaves existed. We crushed that and we failed. Restoring our country to a position of honor should be to go to the Supreme Court, or take this as rapidly up the line to the Supreme Court, that as we are impeaching, to get the United States Supreme Court to agree with the 2006 DOJ memo, get some brilliant lawyers to do it, to say that yes, if a man is convicted in a court of law and loses all of their appeals, that person should not be able to hold office in D.C. because of violation of Article 2, Section 4, the Impeachment Clause, because that is what DOJ was arguing. We should be doing this. We fail to do this at our own peril, because at this moment, we have a cartoon figure of a convicted felon. The real convicted felons that are out there who will want to have that get out of jail free card, they're out there. And they will get violent because they have always been violent. They will not fear the law because their entire life is not being afraid of the law. And they'll win because you want to follow the law, and they will break every law in order to win. We need to hold inside of this legal system, and the U.S. Supreme Court is proving every single day, like what I've been hoping and what I've been saying, is this Supreme Court so much wants to say that the rule of law exists in this country that they are starving to death for it. They are starving to death for us to bring that case in front of them. That convicted felons cannot hold public office in D.C. because it's against Article 2, Section 4. Simple. That if you are convicted, you should go through whatever the normal processes are, the normal lawful processes are, to clean your record. But you don't get to hold office until at least that is done. So there we go. That is why impeachment is only the beginning. There needs in this time to be a movement to do more than just simply try to remove someone. It's to change the fundamental ethical requirements of D.C. It's to make restoring honor everything. We're not just trying to impeach, we are trying to render the swamp illegal and unconstitutional. Let's get to work. I hope you got value out of this, and if you did, please like and share this video, and subscribe. That's just trying to help us grow to the point where, yeah, we can start restoring the honor of Washington, D.C. and begin this debate and solve this debate and clean the swamp by the American people collectively agreeing that the swamp must be ended, and that begins by restoring our honor. So please like, share, and subscribe.